Hello everyone, how are you? I'm Mari Thurger and today I'm going to talk about Tacitus, Publius Gaius Cornelius Tacitus, a senator and an historian of the Roman Empire, and I'm going to talk about one particular point he recorded in his Germania about homosexuals being ritually sacrificed and thrown into bogs, supposedly. Now, take this video as a sort of attachment video to my previous video about heresies and homosexuality in the Viking Age, which you can see in here by clicking on this information icon on this upper corner. Now, I'm doing this video because on the previous video I was trudging through the comment section and I saw that some poor misguided souls that suffer from a terrible brain disease called bigotry had for their only argument Tacitus and sacrificing homosexuals, and they were thrown into bogs. Now, the first thing you need to understand is that the previous video is called Heresies and Homosexuality in the Viking Age, which means I was talking about Scandinavia during the Middle Ages, and Tacitus' accounts are from the first 150 years of Roman Empire, during the Germanic Iron Age. And the bog bodies of homosexuals he talks about are from continental Germania. So I didn't talk about that aspect on the previous video, obviously because we are dealing with two different geographical and temporal realities. Secondly, that has been your only argument and the argument of far-right movements as justification for their belief that homosexuality is abnormal, and since our ancestors killed them, it was normal and we should do the same. So, on that same line of thought, if our ancestors for some reason stuck a cactus up their rear end for ritual purposes, maybe you should do the same. But I find it sickening and very troubling the fact that such people are stuck to that poor argument as proof that we should mistreat people and kill them for their sexual orientations. And some of those people there call themselves heathens, pagans, which doesn't make sense at all, because the mistreatment, punishment and execution of homosexuals in history starts with Abrahamic religious beliefs, and throughout Europe and subsequently spreading into the rest of the world, it mostly happens in postmodern historical realities. The same postmodern world far-right heathens fervently fight against and evoke the old ways of the past, but then they cling to the postmodern attitudes and beliefs when it suits them. It's funny, your lack of argument and poorly structured ideals. So today I'm going to counter-argue with historical and archaeological truth, which won't be that hard, your little argument of throwing homosexuals into bogs because Tacitus said it. So I'm going to start with Tacitus first, and finally I shall talk about these so-called homosexuals thrown into bogs and the reality of bog bodies. I hope you enjoy this video. So, let's see now. Tacitus, in his Germania, informs us that continental Germanic peoples of the Iron Age supposedly sacrificed homosexuals and threw them into bogs. And I quote from him the ancient German executions. It is lawful to accuse in the assembly and even propose death sentence. Punishments are differentiated according to the offense. They hang traitors and delinquents or lawbreakers from trees, cowards, worthless, and those who dishonor their bodies sink them into the swamp mud, bogs, and a grid is thrown on them or above them. I'm directly quoting from Latin I think I still know my way around it. And I did this on purpose because the homosexuals that you are always quoting from Tacitus are in fact corpora infames. Corpore from corpora, to incorporate, to give body, or corpus, matter, the individual, the body. And from infames, from infama, bad reputation, or infamis, dishonored. In other words, corpore infames can be translated to those who dishonor their bodies. For some reason, in English translations, you will get disgraceful sexual acts, which isn't a good translation, but even so, it's open to interpretations. You will also find translations for this as effeminate and homosexual, for no apparent reason. But I'll give the reason. What we need to understand about classical accounts is that Roman and Greek authors recorded what they saw from the distance or what they heard someone say, and that person also saw from a safe distance. But other accounts, people indeed had a close proximity with the cases. They were there, but because they belong to a totally different society with different traditions, religions, customs, and languages, they greatly misinterpreted and misunderstood what they witnessed, simply because they did not understand. And what they witnessed, they interpreted according to their knowledge of their own societies. In great part, classical accounts are actually critics, not only to the people they describe, but also those people and those cultures serve as examples to criticize Rome itself. Another great problem is that these classical sources we are reading nowadays are not the actual original sources from the actual time or period when they were written, but translations from later periods, from Christians who couldn't remain neutral and altered the translations due to their religious and political beliefs. The main problem about the social history and life in general of the ancient Germanic population is that we know it through later authors and overall Romans or Christians. As I said in the previous video about homosexuality in the Viking Age, homosexuality is a modern idea, a post-modern concept. There are no evidences whatsoever that pre-modern and non-Abrahamic cultures actually punished same-gender sexual intercourse. The only thing is that Germanic peoples, just like Romans, could disapprove or would frown upon those who practiced the passive role in a relationship. Not because it was against nature, but because passive was seen as a symptom of weakness. Because these were societies who relied very much in warfare, and a passive approach to life was disapproved because such civilizations honored leadership. but they did not kill or sacrifice people because of their sexual orientations. And some people quote Tacitus as if it were the most reliable sources, as justification for their belief that homosexuality is abnormal and we should punish homosexuals. But those people seem to forget that during the Bronze Age and early Iron Age, some Celtic and Germanic tribes sacrificed children as offerings to the gods, especially when a new settlement was made. And many children, well, some children were sacrificed in lakes near the settlements. So, should we nowadays punish children and drown them every time a new neighborhood is constructed? Please, use whatever you have left that lies between your eyes. Classical writers used foreigner cultures to either criticize or praise their own people and their societies, the societies they lived in. If you were really interested in Tacitus, you would see how much he disliked Rome itself. To him, the ancient Germans were the opposite of Rome, and he is criticizing Rome all the time. He clearly states that the Germanic peoples have all the values the Romans talk about, but don't have themselves. The funny thing about Tacitus' Germania and other works is the fact that it isn't about Germanic peoples at all, it's about Romans. And Tacitus' portrayal of Germans is not based on observation, but on what he wishes Rome should be. If by any chance Germanic peoples sacrificed in ritual homosexuals or someone effeminate, would be as an offering to a very powerful and greatly worshipped deity related to fertility, most likely, because these ancient cultures would not offer something lightly or without a great value. They would offer what they thought it was their most valuable possessions and or people to please the divine. If there was ever the case of sacrificing homosexuals in Bogs, it would probably have been during the cult of Nerthus, who later on in Scandinavia was known as Njordr, who was originally a hermaphroditic deity of fertility, wealth and prosperity. On the previous video about homosexuality in the Viking Age, I did not include in that video the same gender sexual intercourse in the cult of Freyr at Old Uppsala, for instance, nor among initiates in warrior groups, but perhaps I should have had. But if certain people lose their bloody minds solely with the mention of the existence of homosexuals in ancient societies, they would fucking kill themselves if they knew about the same gender sexual intercourse performed in rituals in the ancient cultures they so proudly say were of a pure race of extremely manly individuals, a society so manly that even women had cocks. This last point, I'm only joking, obviously, but it's ridiculous, certain illusions people live in. Worst of all is that people that call themselves pagans, but their worldviews are still very much Abrahamic and not the good parts. They seem to cling to the very worst parts of it. And about bog bodies, I would like to give some quick notes so you can understand the reality of bog bodies. I'm not going to delve much on the matter on this video, but you need to understand this panorama and you will see that it's just ridiculous to say that there was a massive sacrifice of homosexuals by old Germans in wetlands, swamps and bogs. So, human osteological remains. No, let's go straight to the point, to human sacrifice. When it comes to human sacrifice, we have two realities of the deposition of the bodies: dried environment and wet environment. So, in this video, we are talking about bogs. So, it's wet environment. Therefore, we are already reducing human sacrifice to fewer numbers, to just one reality. In the future, I shall develop a video about human sacrifice in the Germanic world. Don't worry. When it comes to the bodies found in wet environment, we have two cases as well. Bodies who have been killed, people who have been killed before their final resting place was in wet environment, or people who were drowned. Human sacrifice was a thing, but it wasn't done in great quantity, on an epic scale. And human sacrifice in wet environment is even rarer. Don't take me wrong, there are plenty of evidences of human sacrifice. But if, for instance, we create a timeline of human sacrifices from the early Bronze Age all the way to the 12th century in the Old Germanic world, pick any country, and in there the cases aren't that much. Let's pick Sweden. In a span of time of roughly 3,000 years, from the Bronze Age to the medieval period around the late 11th century, early 12th century. Now, cases of bodies found in Sweden between this period and on wet environment are around 100 cases, maybe 150, but it doesn't reach 200 cases. Attention, bodies in wet environment, not specifically sacrificial cases. So in a span of 3,000 years, less than 200 cases isn't that much. When it comes to sacrifices as offerings to the divine or land spirits or the supernatural world in general, on the point of view of archaeology and comparing evidences with lore, the folklore, mythology and other religious beliefs, it seems there was no clear distinction between sacrificing animate and inanimate materials. Human, animal, plant and objects were seen as offerings in general, no clear boundary. As I've said in other videos in this channel, artifacts were also understood as imbued with life. So the term sacrifice, lot, could be applied to objects as well. Not only is this an animistic belief that everything possesses a soul or entity, but it's also the belief of imbuing objects with one's essence. And by offering the object as a sacrifice, one is offering his or her own essence to the divine in exchange for the essence of the divine itself. That essence is called meigin or main. So, destroying a human, animal, plant or object was to release the essence of that matter and give it as an offering to the supernatural forces. This is the first principle of creating talismans, which I've also made a video of. To imbue it with magical power, with one's essence, purpose, the will of the person. The great majority of sacrifices are of objects, and then of animals, and then of plants, and finally of human beings, which greatly reduces in number the amount of humans that have been sacrificed in comparison to other sacrificial materials. When it comes to bodies found in wet environment, there are thousands of reasons why the bodies are in such environments. And let me give you some examples. The position of bodies in water can be understood as the result of burials. Burials near water with the rising and the withdrawal of water for climate reasons, geographical reasons, etc., in time will alter the burials. The waters rise, the bodies go underneath the water. The water withdraws again, the area is turned into a wetland, and the bodies that were once previously deposited on dry environment will then change to a wet environment. Burials are not sacrifice, obviously. Burials near bodies of water were fairly common. It so happens that water, for many prehistoric civilizations, constituted a natural boundary, and such boundary was taken into the world of myth and the supernatural reality. Such beliefs were carried out until later times, almost for as long as populations remained pagan in their worldviews and religious understandings. There are thousands of myths involving water and the crossing of water to reach the afterlife, which I shall develop a video about that in the future. But in Scandinavian cases, we have the belief that the dead would travel north and cross the ocean to reach the land of the dead, or going down wells or rivers that flow beneath the mountains or into caves that would carry the dead into the underworld. The very concept of hell, the Norse underworld, one must cross or go along the river Gjöll. And I have made a video about Naustrond, where I have explained a more spiritual and even shamanic approach to the concept of Naustrond and the shore of corpses. But I haven't referred in that video that indeed in pre-Christian Scandinavian populations it was a custom to place the remains of the dead near the coast in important ports and towns, which might give us a hint of the name of Naustrond itself, the corpse shore, remoting to the belief that the dead must cross a body of water to reach the afterlife. And of course, those towns or ports in time lost their importance, were abandoned, the sea level rose, and such bodies in exhibition in the shore became human remains, osteological human remains on wet environment. So burials or deposition of human remains near water was fairly common, remoting to this ancient belief. Most bog bodies or bodies in wet environment are indeed near lakes or near the shore or rivers, etc. Places where water itself rises and withdraws constantly throughout the course of history. And even with the changing of the seasons. Deposition of bodies in water can also be understood as the remains of battle near the shore or near the river. In such bodies we find indications of trauma. Wounds were inflicted and they died because of conflicts, and they remain dead in the place, near a body of water. We also have the case of murder, concealing a body in wetlands. In certain parts of Scandinavia, there was the belief that if one would offer a human to a well or another place that contained water, a wish should be granted, as long as the body would remain underneath the waters and never to be revealed. This is the origins of that tradition of throwing coins into a well. So I assume, obviously, along the history of Scandinavia, someone did murder another person eventually and thrown the person into a well or a body of water to get a wish or power given by the supernatural forces. Or someone did murder another person for whichever reason other than to have a wish granted and concealed the body deep in a wet environment. There are early Scandinavian laws that prohibit human sacrifice to avoid these types of actions, which then led people to sacrifice even more objects and animals. Human remains in bogs that died in the bog were still alive and were not killed before being placed in the wet environment also indicates drowning, because not everyone knew how to swim. In fact, in the Viking period, many Vikings did not know how to swim, and if they fell on deep water, they would drown even before having the chance to pillage a village or two. Listen, many of the sacrificial material, or simply deposition of material, be that objects, animals, plants or humans, be that on dry or wet environment, many were made where rivers met the sea, quite possibly linking rituals to long-distant journeys, as previously said. Most cases of bog bodies are near where rivers meet the sea, and they don't necessarily have to be of human sacrifices. As Tacitus says, also, punishment for certain acts was putting someone in a cage, in swamps, in bogs. This may or may not have led to the death of some people. It's punishment, not necessarily a death sentence. The death sentence was decided in the assembly. So, certain people were placed in bogs for a time as punishment, and some might indeed have been killed that way, to remain in the bog or be drowned, even hanged and drowned. But that doesn't necessarily links to ritual, but to punishment for a crime. And there is that famous case of the Tonsen River in Germany, where weapons and human remains with trauma have been found. And it was said that it was a great sacrificial place, human sacrifices and whatnot, when it clearly shows signals of a Bronze Age battle. So, there are a lot of non-ritual reasons to find bodies in wet environments, which greatly reduces in number the actual human sacrifices in bogs. I'm not saying there weren't human sacrifices placed in bogs, but it wasn't that common. We don't even know that if they existed at all, because most human sacrifices we know of in the Germanic world, especially in continental Germania, were actually burning people and beheading them. So, in conclusion, we know that corpora infames can be translated to those who dishonor their bodies, which is highly open to interpretation, and it's solely on the point of view of Tacitus himself, portraying Germanic populations as a form of criticizing Rome itself. So, we will never truly know what the Germanic peoples were actually really up to. Not just because of that, but because Tacitus himself was never there in contact with these people. He just heard things. And we also know that there are plenty of non-ritual reasons we find bodies in bogs that have no link whatsoever with human sacrifice. Human sacrifice was real, but not as most people think it was, on an epic scale, and certainly not for trivial reasons such as love-making. So bringing Tacitus as an argument to justify the mistreatment of homosexuals not only is a sign of psychopathy, mental illness in general, but also a sign of great ignorance of the sources, and among other things. And I bet people that bring up this argument of gays into the bogs are people who saw that on a meme or someone told them, and it became a well-known argument among far-right movements, and then they don't even bother to check the sources. So such people not only show signs of mental illness and ignorance, but also laziness. And a lazy person is a person without value in a society, therefore it's worthless to a society. And, according to Tacitus, those who were useless, lazy, and worthless in general, as he says, ignaos, their punishment was being thrown into a bog. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you found it useful, give it a like, and please, by all means, do share it with the world. Take this video as a counter-argument when dealing with homophobic people who bring up Tacitus into the game. And also, if you don't want to miss any of the content of this channel, when or if you subscribe, please click on the bell icon so you can receive all the notifications of what goes on in this channel. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, April.